Why is the US really going to war with Iran? It's not about nukes, it's not about religion, it's about a machine, a 50-year-old system designed to trade printed paper for the world's actual wealth. We're talking about the petrodollar. Touch this system and the US comes for you. Iraq tried it, Libya tried it. Now, it's Iran's turn. But this isn't just some geopolitical chess game played by elites. Your gas prices, your groceries, the actual purchasing power of the cash in your pocket, they are all held hostage by this exact doom loop. It all started 50 years ago with a backroom deal, a global bank run, and a lie that changed history. And this story begins with a Frenchman. Chapter 1. The Golden Glitch. 1960s. French President Charles de Gaulle does something that makes Washington absolutely panic. He secretly orders all French gold held in the New York Fed's vaults to be shipped back to Paris. 3 years. 44 sea shipments. 129 flights. They hauled away over 3,000 tons of physical gold. You heard that right? 3,000 tons shipped home boat by boat. This isn't a movie, this is recorded history. Why did he have the leverage to do this? Because at the time, there was an ironclad rule accepted by the entire planet. $35 equaled 1 ounce of gold. It was written in black and white in the 1944 Bretton Woods agreement. If you held dollars, you could swap them for hard, physical metal. Anytime. How did the US set that rule? Simple. World War II turned Europe into rubble. Countries paid the US in gold for weapons and supplies. When the dust settled, over 60% of the world's gold was chilling in American vaults. Whoever holds the gold makes the rules. The dollar became the undisputed king of fiat. But de Gaulle, he did the math. And he found a fatal glitch in the matrix. The global economy was booming. Countries needed more and more dollars to facilitate trade. But gold doesn't just spawn out of thin air. Meaning, the US promised to convert dollars to gold on demand? Mathematically impossible. Add the Vietnam War into the mix in the 60s, and the US money printer was running red hot just to fund the military, all while the gold in the vault stayed exactly the same. De Gaulle saw the truth. This was a geopolitical Ponzi scheme. And in a Ponzi, the first one to the exit survives. So, France cashed out. Britain, Germany, and Japan scrambled right behind them. Boom. A global bank run on the US dollar. August 15, 1971. President Nixon goes on live television and drops a quote that forever altered reality. The dollar is no longer convertible to gold. Translation: we owe you gold, but you're not getting it. The dollar tanked overnight. Bretton Woods collapsed. The world was left holding the bag. Without gold backing it, what's the difference between a US dollar and a piece of scrap paper? Chapter 2. The birth of the petrodollar. But what the US did next was a stroke of absolute ruthless genius. The dollar couldn't die. If it became worthless paper, the US goes from global hegemon to the world's biggest bag holder. The dollar desperately needed a new anchor, a new foundation of credit. And this anchor had to meet 2 mandatory criteria. The entire world had to be addicted to it, and the US had to control it. Look around the 1970s. Only one asset fit the bill. Oil. You probably think oil is just the gas at your local station. Look closer. Your phone's plastic case? Made from oil. Your medication, your shampoo, your Amazon boxes, all petroleum byproducts. The globe burns through over 36 billion barrels of oil a year. Half of it is combusted. The other half literally builds your physical reality. Oil isn't an option. It is the base layer source code of modern civilization. It's harder than gold. But the US didn't just want enough oil for domestic use. They wanted the monopoly on global pricing and settlement. If every single barrel of oil on Earth is transacted in dollars, the dollar has infinite demand. Enter Saudi Arabia, the largest oil producer on the planet. An absolute monarchy where the nation's oil and power are consolidated in the hands of a single royal family. Right next door, the Iranian Revolution had just erupted. The Shah was ousted overnight. The Saudi royals knew the score. Without a heavy-hitting bodyguard, they were next on the chopping block. You had a superpower desperate for an economic anchor and a monarchy desperate for a bulletproof vest. But they needed a catalyst. 1973. The Yom Kippur War breaks out. Arab states hit the West with an oil embargo, and prices quadrupled overnight. The US finally gets its once-in-a-lifetime window. 1974. Masterminded by Henry Kissinger, the US hands Saudi Arabia a deal that fundamentally rewrites the world order. Condition 1. Saudi Arabia sells its oil strictly in US dollars. Condition 2. Convince the rest of OPEC to do exactly the same. Condition 3. Take those massive dollar profits and recycle them into US treasuries and American weapons. In exchange, the US military becomes the absolute guarantor of the Saudi regime. Touch them and you deal with us. The Saudis took the deal. From that second forward, virtually every drop of crude traded on the planet had to be settled in US dollars. Every nation on Earth now had to earn dollars, stockpile dollars, and spend dollars. The dollar morphed from a gold receipt into the VIP ticket for global energy. Chapter 3. The Economic Perpetual Motion Machine. This is the Petrodollar, and its sheer power is infinitely more terrifying than you think. Let me break down this doom loop so you can see the matrix. The world needs oil, so they must acquire dollars. Oil producers sell their crude, rake in billions of dollars, and immediately pivot to buy US Treasury bonds. The US government takes that cash, spends it, and prints more. Those printed dollars flow back out into the global economy, and the world uses them to buy more oil. Rinse and repeat, forever. Do you see it? It's an economic perpetual motion machine. The US pulled off the ultimate cheat code, swapping paper printed from thin air for the world's hard physical wealth. The French called it exorbitant privilege. But that's not even the most brutal part. The most brutal part is that the US runs the printer, and the entire planet acts as their exit liquidity. The logic is flawless. Because of oil, the world is forced to hold massive dollar reserves. When the US fires up the money printer, the dollar devalues, meaning your national reserves shrink. It's like a giant pot of soup. The US secretly dumps a bucket of water into the pot. Everyone's bowl gets diluted. Meanwhile, the guy holding the bucket just traded his watered-down soup for real, tangible assets. So, what do countries do with these massive dollar piles? They can't just stuff them under a mattress. The mainstream play is to buy US treasuries. Simply put, loaning money to the US government for a little yield. You keep hearing about that astronomical $36 trillion national debt. Where do you think that cash comes from? The rest of the world lent it to them. And notice how every time the Fed whispers about a rate hike or cut, global markets panic. That's why. The globe is trapped holding dollar-denominated assets. One interest rate decision in Washington directly dictates the net worth of billions of people. But here is the absolute kicker. The decision to hike or cut, print or tighten, is made solely based on what the US economy needs. You don't get a vote. If the US needs to stimulate its economy, they print, and your dollars lose purchasing power. If they need to crush inflation, they aggressively hike rates, capital flees your borders, and your local currency and stock market gets slaughtered. Your profit and your loss aren't decided by you. They're decided by them. The entire world is essentially clocking into work for the United States. Most of us just don't realize it. Chapter 4. The Financial Kill Switch. And think about this. Every time bombs drop in the Middle East, where does terrified capital run? Straight into the dollar. Because the dollar is the ultimate safe haven asset. The more chaotic the world gets, the more capital floods into US markets. Just look at the tape. The second the 2026 Iran conflict escalated, the dollar index spiked. Oil blasted to highs unseen since 2022. Every other nation takes a double hit. Skyrocketing oil prices crush their import costs, while capital flight plummets their currency. And the US, thanks to the shale revolution, they're already the largest oil producer on Earth. High crude prices just mean record profits for energy titans. The world catches shrapnel. The US counts cash. Now today's dollar hegemony doesn't just rely on oil anymore, But without the petrodollar laying the underlying plumbing for global settlement, Wall Street's financial dominance and Silicon Valley's tech supremacy simply wouldn't exist. But a harvester isn't enough to rule the world. The US also built a lethal kill switch to deal with rogue actors. Imagine every bank on Earth is in the same giant WhatsApp group for wire transfers. Need to buy oil or do cross-border trade? Your funds have to route through this chat. This network is called SWIFT, and the US is the group admin. Piss off the admin, and they can pull 3 levers instantly. Number 1, kick you out of the chat, sever your SWIFT access, and paralyze your ability to trade globally. Number 2, freeze your wallet. Any sovereign wealth you hold in US banks is locked instantly. Number 3, the mob tactic, secondary sanctions. Anyone who dares to do business with you, they get sanctioned too. Russia, Iran, and North Korea have all tasted this combo. At best, your trade gridlocks. At worst, your foreign exchange reserves vaporize overnight. Without firing a single bullet, the US can asphyxiate an entire economy. Chapter 5. The Price of Defiance. But what if financial warfare isn't enough? What if someone calls the bluff, ignores the sanctions, and bypasses the dollar anyway? That's when the real guns come out. Historically, every single nation that tried to bypass the petrodollar paid the ultimate price. Year 2000. Saddam Hussein announces Iraq will shift its oil sales to the euro. Sure, the US went into Iraq for a multitude of stated reasons. But Saddam touched the absolute third rail of global finance. By setting a precedent, he made himself the perfect cautionary tale. 3 years later, US tanks roll into Baghdad. Saddam is dragged out of a spider hole. First order of business post-invasion. Iraqi oil is switched immediately back to the dollar. Some people didn't get the memo. 2010. Muammar Gaddafi tries his luck. He pushes to establish the Pan-African gold dinar. The goal? Make the entire African continent settle oil in physical gold, totally circumventing the dollar. 1 year later, NATO airstrikes level Libya. Gaddafi is killed in the streets. It is the exact same playbook. You see the pattern now, right? First, they squeeze you with finance. If you don't break, they break you with kinetic force. But there is one country that absorbed decades of sanctions, didn't die, and actually built a shadow settlement network completely independent of the dollar. They even inked a UN for oil agreement with China. Iran. And Iran isn't acting alone. A growing syndicate of heavyweight oil producers is starting to band together. De-dollarization has pivoted from a fringe movement into a coordinated transition by energy giants. Long-term sanctions ironically forced the creation of non-dollar infrastructure. Iran became the proof of concept. Let's be completely objective here. The dollar still comprises roughly 58% of global forex reserves and dominates 88% of currency trades. It is not collapsing tomorrow. But Washington's urgency stems from this. If Iran proves this path is viable, the floodgates open. Once a de-dollarization macro trend reaches critical mass, it is virtually impossible to reverse. So the US made its choice. Crush the trend before it becomes reality. 2026. Missiles fall on Tehran. The objective is twofold. Force Iranian oil back into the dollar matrix and physically obliterate the largest node of the non-dollar network. Slaughter the chicken to scare the monkeys. Show every single fence-sitting oil state exactly what the cost of challenging the petrodollar looks like. But there is an even deeper, purely geographic layer to this war. You might ask, the US produces enough shale oil for itself, so why do they still obsess over the Middle East? Because it's not about owning the oil, it's about controlling its circulation. Look at Iran on a map. They sit directly on the Strait of Hormuz. Nearly 30% of all seaborne oil on Earth squeezes through this narrow artery. 80% of China's oil imports pass through here. Same for Japan, South Korea, and Europe. The US isn't desperate for oil, but its global competitors are. Whoever holds that string holds the kill switch to those nations' economies.
control the choke point, and you command the ultimate leverage at the global negotiating table.
Chapter 6: The Triffin Dilemma and the Fragile Empire. So now you see it. On the surface, it's a war with Iran. In reality, it is the violent defense of the US dollar, and a calculated move to hold the energy lifelines of every geopolitical rival hostage. Hearing all this, you probably think the US is untouchable. Print paper for wealth, sanction the weak, bomb the defiant. Is there absolutely no weakness in this system? There is, and it's a fatal flaw written directly into its base code. Economists call it the Triffin Dilemma. It's an iron law. If you want to be the sole provider of the world's reserve currency, you must pump massive amounts of dollars into the global system so other countries can buy oil and trade. How do you pump dollars out? By running massive trade deficits. You buy their goods, they take your cash. But the brutal byproduct, your domestic manufacturing gets hollowed out. In 1979, US manufacturing accounted for 20% of GDP. By 2024, it was under 10%. Millions of Rust Belt workers lost their livelihoods. Generations of technical mastery died the day the assembly line stopped. That wasn't a management failure. That was the structural tax required to maintain dollar hegemony. Now you understand the paradox. Why Donald Trump pushed the bring manufacturing back narrative for years, and why it's mathematically impossible. If you want global dollar supremacy, you must endure trade deficits. If you want the factories back, you have to forfeit the dollar's global throne. You can only pick one. It is math, not politics. And the cost of this empire goes even deeper. Remember, the US is stepping onto the battlefield carrying a $36 trillion national debt. The interest expense alone is now over $1 trillion a year. That is higher than the entire US defense budget. Nearly 1/5 of all federal spending is vaporized just to service the interest, not paying down the principal, just the interest. And war is a cash incinerator that makes the petrodollar look cheap. Base reconstruction, munitions burn rates, the daily operating costs of carrier strike groups, every line item is an astronomical figure. A nation lugging $36 trillion in debt cannot physically sustain this burn rate forever, and Iran is betting everything on precisely that. They don't need to win a head-on collision, they just need to drag it out. As long as the conflict burns, oil stays high, and the US fiscal black hole rips wider. At the same time, the weaponization of the dollar is triggering massive blowback, freezing $300 billion in Russian reserves. Booting Iran from SWIFT. Every time Washington deploys its financial weapons, it broadcasts a chilling warning to the rest of the world. Your wealth is only yours until we say it isn't. What do you think other countries are doing? They're rushing for the exits. Global central banks are hoarding physical gold at record speeds. Saudi Arabia is opening up to the yuan. India and the UAE are settling oil trades in rupees. 50 years ago, Kissinger used a backroom deal to force the world onto the dollar. 50 years later, an increasing number of nations are quietly building lifeboats. Conclusion: the law of the jungle. To keep the money printer alive, the US has to keep fighting. But every single war deepens the fractures in the foundation. But let's be brutally objective. The dollar, the treasuries, and the US military are not crashing tomorrow. This is a leviathan that has dominated for half a century. Its inertia, its massive scale, and its safe haven status will not be shattered by a few regional conflicts. The cracks are real, but the opponent is terrifyingly strong. How much longer can this machine run? No one knows. But peace never just falls from the sky. The law of the jungle never left the room. Facing a system this entrenched and this powerful, the only option left is to drop the illusions and prepare for the fight. Until then, let's hope for peace.